Nearly Headless Nick tried vainly to recapture his audience, but gave up as Sir Patrick's head went sailing past him to loud cheers. Harry was very cold by now, not to mention hungry. I can't stand much longer of this, Ron muttered, his teeth chattering. As the orchestra ground back into action and the ghosts swept back onto the dance floor, let's go, Harry agreed. They backed towards the door, nodding and beaming at anyone who looked at them, and in a minute later were hurrying back up the passageway full of black candlelights. Pudding might not have finished yet, said Ron hopefully, leading the way towards the steps to the entrance hall. And then Harry heard it. Rip, tear, kill. It was the same voice, the same cold, murderous voice he had heard in Lockhart's office. He stumbled to a halt, clutching at the stone wall, listening with all his might, looking around, squinting up and down the dimly lit passageway. Harry, what are you? It's that voice again. Shut up a minute. So hungry. For so long. Listen, said Harry urgently, and Ron and Hermione froze, watching him. Kill. Time to kill. The voice was growing fainter. Harry was sure it was moving away, moving upwards. A mixture of fear and excitement gripped him as he stared at the dark ceiling. How could it be moving upwards? Was it a phantom to whom stone ceilings didn't matter? This way, he shouted, and he began to run, up the stairs, into the entrance hall. It was no good hoping to hear anything here. The babble of talk from the Halloween feast was echoing out of the great hall. Harry sprinted up the marble staircase to the first floor, Ron and Hermione clattering behind him. Harry, what are we... Shh! Harry strained his ears, distantly from the floor above, and growing fainter still, he heard the voice. I smell blood! I smell blood!
After recess, we only have one short thing left. So I don't want her to miss her snack or recess.
Perfect. Thank you. His stomach lurched. It's going to kill someone, he shouted. And ignoring Ron and Hermione's bewildered faces, he ran up the next flight of steps, 3 at a time, trying to listen over his own pounding footsteps. Harry hurtled around the whole of the second floor, Ron and Hermione panting behind him, not stopping until they turned a corner into the last deserted passage. Harry, what was that all about? Said Ron, wiping sweat off his face. I couldn't hear anything. But Hermione gave a sudden gasp, pointing down the corridor. Look! Something was shining on the wall ahead. They approached, slowly, squinting through the darkness. Foot-high words that had been daubed on the wall between 2 windows, shimmering in the light cast by the flaming torches. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. What's that thing hanging underneath? Said Ron, a slight quiver in his voice. As they edged nearer, Harry almost slipped over. There was a large puddle of water on the floor. Ron and Hermione grabbed him, and they inched towards the message, eyes fixed on the dark shadow beneath it, as 3 of them realized what it was at once and leapt backwards with a splash. Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, was hanging by her tail from the torch bracket. She was stiff as a board and her eyes wide and staring. For a few seconds they didn't move. Then Ron said, Let's get out of here. Shouldn't we try and help? Harry began awkwardly. Trust me, said Ron. We don't want to be found here. But it was too late. A rumble, as though distant thunder, told them that the feast had just ended. From either end of the corridor where they stood came the sound of hundreds of feet climbing the stairs and the loud, happy talk of well-fed people. Next moment, students were crashing into the passageway from both ends. The chatter, the bustle, and the noise died suddenly as people in front spotted the hanging cat. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood alone in the middle of the corridor as silence fell among the mass of students, pressing forwards to see the grisly sight. Then someone shouted through the quiet, Enemies of the air, beware! You'll be next, mudbloods! It was Draco Malfoy. He had pushed to the front of the crowd, his cold eyes alive, his usual bloodless face flushed, as he grinned at the sight of the hanging, immobile cat. Chapter 9. The Writing on the Wall. What's going on here? What's going on? Attracted no doubt by Malfoy's shout, Argus Filch came shouldering his way through the crowd. Then he saw Mrs. Norris and fell back, clutching his face in horror. My cat! My cat! What's happened to Mrs. Norris? He shrieked, and his popping eyes fell on Harry. You! He screeched. You murdered my cat! You killed her! I'll kill you! Argus! Dumbledore had arrived on the scene, followed by a number of other teachers. In seconds, they had swept past Harry and Ron and Hermione and detached Mrs. Norris from the torch bracket. Come with me, Argus, he said to Filch. You too, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, and Miss Granger. Lockhart stepped forward eagerly. My office is nearest, Headmaster. Just upstairs. Please feel free. Thank you, Gilderoy, said Dumbledore. The silent crowd parted to let them pass. Lockhart looked excited and important. Hurried after Dumbledore. So did Professor McGonagall and Snape. As they entered Lockhart's darkened office, there was a flurry of movement across the walls. Harry saw several of the Lockharts in the pictures dodging out of sight, their hair in rollers. The real Lockhart lit the candles on his desk and stood back. Dumbledore laid Mrs. Norris on the polished surface and began to examine her. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged tense looks and sank into chairs outside the pool of candlelight, watching. The tip of Dumbledore's long, crooked nose was barely an inch from Mrs. Norris's fur. He was looking at her closely through his half-moon spectacles, his long fingers gently prodding and poking. Professor McGonagall was bent almost as close, her eyes narrowed. Snape, looming behind them, half in shadow, wearing a most peculiar expression. It was as though he was trying hard not to smile. And Lockhart was hovering around all of them, making suggestions. It was definitely a curse that killed her, probably the Transfiguration torture. I've seen it used many times. So unlucky I wasn't there. I know the very counter-curse that would have saved her. Lockhart's comments were punctuated by Filch's dry, raking sobs. He was slumped in a chair by the desk, unable to look at Mrs. Norris, his face in his hands. Much as he detested Filch, Harry couldn't help feeling a bit sorry for him, though not nearly as sorry as he felt for himself. If Dumbledore believed Filch, and he would be expelled for sure. Dumbledore was now muttering strange words under his breath and tapping Mrs. Norris with his wand, but nothing happened. She continued to look as though she had been recently stuffed. I remember something very similar happened in Ouagadougou, said Lockhart. A series of attacks. The full stories in my autobiography. I was able to provide the townsfolk with various amulets, which cleared the matter up at once. The photographs of Lockhart on the wall were all nodding in agreement as he talked. One of them had forgotten to remove his hairnet. At last Dumbledore straightened up. She's not dead, August, he said softly. Lockhart stopped abruptly in the middle of counting the number of murders he had prevented. Not dead, choked Filch, looking through his fingers at Mrs. Norris. But why's she all stiff and frozen? She's been petrified, said Dumbledore. Ah, I thought so, said Lockhart. But how? I cannot say. Ask him, shrieked Filch, turning his blotched and tear-stained face to Harry. No second year could have done this, Dumbledore said, firmly. It would take dark magic of the most advanced. He did it! He did it! Filch spat, his pouchy face purpling. He saw what he wrote on the wall. He found in my office. He knows I'm a... Filch's face worked horribly. He knows that I'm a squib, he finished. I never touched Mrs. Norris, Harry said, loudly, uncomfortably aware of everyone looking at him, including all of Lockhart's on the wall. And I don't even know what a squib is. Rubbish, snarled Filch. He saw my quick spell letter. If I might speak, Headmaster, said Snape. From the shadows, and Harry's sense of foreboding increased. He was sure nothing Snape had to say was going to do him any good. Potter and his friends may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, he said, a slight sneer curling his mouth as though he doubted it. But we do have a set of suspicious circumstances here. Why were they up in the upstairs corridor at all? Why weren't they at the Halloween feast? Harry, Ron, and Hermione all launched into an explanation about the Death Day party. There were hundreds of ghosts. They'll tell you that we were there. But why not join the feast afterwards, said Snape, his black eyes glittering in the candlelight. Why go up to that corridor? Ron and Hermione looked at Harry. Because, Harry said, his heart thumping very fast. Something told him that it would be very far-fetched if he told them that he had been led there by a bodiless voice no one else could hear. Because we were tired and wanted to go to bed, he said, without any supper. Said Snape, a triumphant smile flickering across his gaunt face. I didn't think ghosts provided food fit for living people at their parties. We weren't hungry, said Ron loudly, as his stomach gave a huge rumble. Snape's nasty smile widened. I suggest, Headmaster, that Potter is not being entirely truthful, he said. It might be a good idea if he were deprived of certain privileges until he was ready to tell us the whole story. I personally feel that he should be taken off the Gryffindor Quidditch team until he is ready to be honest. Really, Severus, said Professor McGonagall sharply, I see no reason to stop the boy playing Quidditch. This cat wasn't hit over the head with a broomstick. There is no evidence at all that Potter has done anything wrong. Dumbledore was giving Harry a searching look. His twinkling light blue gaze made Harry feel as though he was being x-rayed. Innocent until proven guilty, Severus, he said firmly. Snape looked furious. So did Filch. My cat has been petrified, he shrieked, his eyes popping. I want to see some punishment. We will be able to cure her, Argus, said Dumbledore patiently. Professor Sprout recently managed to procure some mandrakes. As soon as they have reached their full size, I will have a potion made, which will revive Mrs. Norris.